everyone. Welcome to our workshop. Our amazing guest today is Ferdinand Goetzen, and we're going to talk about voice of customer today. Really, really excited to learn about this topic because it's like a backbone of everything that SaaS product managers and founders can do. So, Ferdinand, tell us a bit more about yourself, about Reveall. You're CEO of Reveall, a fairly new UX research product. So, a few words how that came along and why voice of customer is your area of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Really excited to take part in this. Also, because I think it's a really underrated topic. It's something that is really worth talking about, and I think even people who aren't too familiar with the voice of the customer will be surprised how much they engage with it already. Um, but yeah, as an intro, my name is Ferdinand. I am the CEO and co-founder of Reveall, Reveall.co. We launched just a couple of months ago, and essentially, we like to call ourselves the all-in-one platform for customer-obsessed teams. Essentially, what we try to do is we try to help you take all of your customer data, primarily the data you derive from research and other sources and feedback, bring it into one place, structure it, interpret it, and take action on it. Because, and some of these stats I'll be sharing in a bit, everyone talks to the customer. Almost all companies talk to their customers. All companies agree it's important to take their customers' opinions into consideration when making decisions, but only a small percentage of companies actually do that in practice. And that's a problem that I've always been really acutely aware of. It's a problem I've talked about a lot, and it's a problem I've experienced firsthand, that even if you're really passionate about being customer centric, actually seeing that, doing that in practice is a really big challenge. And that's why we built Reveall, to essentially facilitate that and bridge the gap between data and action.
Will you share, before we jump to the beer through the phone, would you do a brief overview of what your professional life looked like before you started the company? Like, where does your insight stem from?
Yeah. So I spent the better part of the last decade working in marketing and product-led growth. So I've usually sat at the intersection of commercial and product teams. So working a lot with UX, working a lot with in-app onboarding, in-app referrals, product-driven growth initiatives, and then also on the marketing commercial side, taking on various things. I was previously the chief growth officer at a company called Recruity, which is one of the fastest growing SaaS companies here in the Netherlands. And until early this year, I was the director of marketing growth at a company called 3D Hubs, which was an online manufacturing platform where I got to experience this challenge of trying to bring all your customer data into one place and really acting on it. Really experienced it firsthand. And the company was also a really hyper growth company and went through a $300 million plus acquisition in January this year. And in the past, I then worked for multiple agencies, multiple consultancies. I worked for a company called Growth Tribe for a while, where I got to do a lot of different UX projects with companies like ING and Transavia and KLM. So I've worked with over 100 companies, ranging from the 0 to 1 startups all the way to big established corporates. And the one thing I learned is that these companies couldn't be more different. But when it comes to really being customer centric and trying to apply this knowledge in what they do share more similarities than you'd expect.
Awesome. Let's jump to your slides. So the way we're going to go today, we're going to do a short presentation of the core theory, and then everybody please do pile up your questions in the Q&A section on the right hand side of your screen, and we're just going to do a free form Q&A in the remaining time, and I'm looking forward to this. Would you like to share your screen?
Yes. Let me see if I get this right. There we go. Can you all see this?
Yay.
Perfect. Cool. So what I want to talk about is the voice of the customer. And it's one of those things that I knew what the voice of the customer was long before I understood what the term voice of the customer means. And what I mean by that is sometimes people treat it in very they treat it like this complex academic topic almost. When you're reading some articles online or when you hear about it, it sounds like this really like this academic theoretical concept that you need to wrap your head around. But actually, the voice of the customer, if you want to define it, it's literally the voice of the customer. It's essentially what your customer is saying. So it's the opinions, needs, desires expressed by the customer. So if you wanted a technical definition, it's essentially encompasses all the feedback that you get from your customers regarding their needs, expectations, and feelings towards your products and services, and experiences for that matter. So essentially, it's everything your customers say. This is to be differentiated from everything your customers do, which is probably the starting point on voice of the customer, that listening to your customers, gaining that feedback, it can be incredibly valuable, but it's important to do it well. It's important to treat it right. And it's important to always contextualize and complement the voice of the customer with other data. Because very often, and I always say that 90% of the questions you ask yourself, whether you're in a commercial role or a product role, 90% of the questions you ask yourself can be answered by just listening to your customers. That being said, you should always also watch what your customers are doing to make sure that those also correlate, because sometimes they will differ. And we'll go into that in a second. But I want to kind of start with why it matters. So VOC, which is short for voice of the customer, is becoming something that's increasingly important for a few reasons, which is, first of all, there's all kinds of studies. You can just search stats on customer experience, and you will get hundreds of thousands of documents and researches and articles and posts with all kinds of stats. Fundamentally, it all boils down to one thing, which is customers' expectations are higher than ever. Like 76% of customers really expect companies to understand their needs. And this is where the need for good UX, the need for good design, the need for good usability, intuitive interfaces is just higher than ever before, because the field of UX is growing, the amount of professionals working in each company, the standards have risen a lot in the last 10, 15, 20 years, even just in the last couple of years, to be honest. And customers are really quickly adapting to those expectations. Poor user experiences suffer more and more rapidly than ever before, because they just expect you to understand their needs. They expect you to be able to address them effectively. And now the other thing is that 95% of companies frequently listen to the customer. So that's already a good starting point. Customers expect you to understand them. And it turns out that pretty much every company out there talks to the customer. And you might be thinking that sounds like a really high number, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean interviews, right? It can be interviews, it can be sales conversations, it can be customer support tickets, it can be reviews that they leave on Trustpilot or another site. So really, anytime you hear your customer's opinion or feedback or input is a little nugget of voice of the customer, and every company is collecting that to some extent. Of course, some companies do this way more meticulously and way more effectively than others, but every company, or practically every company, seems to be doing this. But when you look at a study by Adobe where they looked into how many companies are actually implementing this into their actions, that number drops drastically from 95% to 29%. So what do we know? Which is customers care about and they really expect you to understand them. Most companies are talking to the customers, so most companies have the potential to understand them. But when it comes to making decisions and taking action, companies do not apply these conversations, this knowledge, into their decision making. And we've done research ourselves at Reveall, and we found that when we talked to stakeholders in really big companies across industries, we asked over 30 of them, on a scale from 1 to 10, how important is it to take the customer opinion into account when you take action? And the average grade was over a 9 out of 10. So these companies that are struggling to implement it, this 29%, is not because they don't want to. It's because it's difficult to do. And the reason this is difficult to do, there are lots of different reasons, but basically customer research is challenging, and customer feedback, it's usually a lot of unstructured data. So when you have your analytics, it's really nice. You can add all kinds of filters. You can maybe create pivot tables and stuff if you're creating BI tools, and your data flows in a pretty structured way. So it's very easy, and companies are getting really good at interpreting analytics and graphs. But when we're talking about voice of the customer data, it's coming in, it's usually buried in larger bits of content. So it'll be a long customer review. It'll be a detailed customer support ticket. It'll be a 20, 30-minute interview. It'll be an hour-long focus group. It'll be in the form of hundreds of survey responses or feedback requests or NPS responses. It usually requires a bit of digging, a bit of mining, which is time intensive, and also very large in terms of kind of the amount of information you need to handle. So usually what happens is that companies lose a lot of information. The data gets siloed. So sales, marketing, customer success, product, they're all having their own conversations, and they're not sharing those insights with each other. And it usually ends up at the bottom of some kind of Notion document or in a Google Drive folder that nobody reads. Somebody recently said to me that, the problem with Confluence is that it's more about writing than about reading. That's nothing against Confluence in particular, but a lot of these documentation and wiki tools, nobody reads them because there's just too much information. And if you apply that to voice of the customer research, that's super, super true. It's just tons of information. It's really hard to process it. And the frustration that I had and a lot of the people we talk to have is that you're just doing a lot of repeat research. You're doing things that people have already researched before, and you're trying to find out information that you already kind of have. There's already that customer conversation, that sales call, that customer support ticket, that review that is iterating what you're trying to find out. It's just difficult to get a full 360 view of that. And even if you do that, turning that into real action, structuring it, and then understanding how does this convert into activities, actions we should take, is a whole nother challenge altogether. And that's really kind of the core challenges. And I think one of the ways to solve that is to create a clear process that systematically turns this voice of the customer data into action. And the process we follow, and this is kind of what we built our product around and our vision, is also just you need to gather the data. That's the starting point. And we already know that 95% of companies do this. You then need to bring that into one place and structure it, interpret it, and then create clear actions out of it. That's a really simple process for taking voice of the customer, acting on it, and it's just something that you need to. I think half of the battle is just sitting together and saying, "Let's do this," and then building the process. Of course, isn't a picnic. It doesn't take 2 seconds. It takes some time, but already just agreeing as a company that you need to listen to the voice of the customer and implement it in your decision making. That's already half the battle. Now, there are challenges that come with the voice of the customer, and I think one of them is that you need to ask the right questions. So if you're getting the voice of the customer through interviews, through surveys, through feedback forums, asking the right questions is super, super important. This is a great quote by Carl Jung, not really a UXer, but still big in the psychology philosophy world. And that's to ask the right question is already half the solution of a problem. And we really believe this. When you ask leading questions, when you ask biased questions, when you ask problematic questions, you do not get good input. And this is where voice of the customer can become problematic, because I think everyone here who's active in the UX and product design world or the product development world has heard the quote, look at what your customers do, not at what they say, which is almost a direct dig at voice of the customer. But the only reason we need to be careful of what the customers say is often because we're asking the wrong questions, or we're asking the right questions in the wrong way. And here's just a little graph by Miro that kind of gives an idea. So, what do you like about the current banking app is a different question than tell me about your experience using the current banking app. Why? Because the first question has a bias. We're talking about what you do like, implying that there's something to like. And it doesn't matter if there's something to like or not. You shouldn't imply that in your question. And this is something you need to take into account in all of your research efforts, in all of your feedback collection efforts. How do we create non-leading, unbiased questions? That already helps make sure that the voice of the customer is as clean as possible. One thing that we like to do, and there's a little short link down there. I'm sorry, I don't have a cleaner one. Is we built this voice of the customer template. You can just create the sheet and create a copy of it. And it's just really simple. It's just basically brings the voice of the customer together. You try to define what is the underlying problem of the comment that the customer made, and you try to create an action point to address that problem, and then you prioritize them. This is something that any team of any size can already implement. And it's not something you have to do all the time. You can just take an hour every week, every month, whatever fits you, write down all of the customer comments, go through all of your support tickets, write down all of the customer comments, and then just map the problems and map a solution. So this is a really simple way to turn the voice of the customer into concrete action. Now, one thing that's really important, there is a lot of truth to the idea of, don't just listen to your customers, look at what they do. It's super important to contextualize the voice of the customer. It's not enough to just listen to what they say. You do need to look at what they're doing. Look at your A/B tests, look at your conversion rates, look at your product metrics, look at user activity, look at your analytics, look at external research, desk research, reports from Forrester, market research and industry reports, articles, any kind of external data and user behavioral data that you can use to complement and contextualize the voice of the customer is going to be super, super valuable. That's also something we try to do within our platform, is help you bring this voice of the customer and the behavioral information and the market information and bring that together to create a full picture. And that's something that you should always aim to do. There's that famous quote by Henry Ford, which is, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said, build faster horses. That there is a limitation, of course, to your customer's experience and their perspective. So you always need these external factors to complement. And of course, voice of the customer is something that is mainly geared towards your customers, but you should also be talking to the people who are not your customers, who who are the who are the companies that in a sales call you're losing the deal, or they choose not to sign up, or they end up churning. Who are those people? It's one of the reasons we really like to build a community around our product, because community is a great way to talk to people who might not have the bias of your customers, because at the end of the day, if someone is your customer, then they primarily like what you're doing. So at the end of the day, the principles of voice of the customer need to be applied beyond just your current customer base to understanding the entire market and the people that surround your customers and might not necessarily be taking the same actions as them. And the last one, and this is a little bit of a shameless plug and also more transparent, is to use the right tools. And there's a lot of tools out there that help you collect the voice of the customer effectively. There's a lot of tools out there that help you centralize information. And this is really one of the things that we try to do, is we take the voice of the customer as a starting point. We help you bring all of that information into one place within our platform. And then we help you complement that with other pieces of information. So you can upload market research reports, or you can upload results of A/B tests or surveys, and you can complement some of those voice of the customer data points with other data points to create a really full picture, interpret, and take action on them. Finally, if you'd like just a quick read, we've written a guide about this. It's nothing revolutionary. It's nothing super thought leadership in that sense, but it does summarize some of the core ideas behind voice of the customer, how to implement it in a strategy, how to think about it in a smart way. And yeah, if you check out this guide, there's a lot of what I just covered in there. You can also get a link directly to that template I showed. So really important. If you're going to use a tool like Reveall, that would be awesome. But if you're not going to use a tool like that, it's not an excuse not to do it. If you want to find a low budget approach to doing this, use a template like we built in Google Sheets. It also does the trick, especially if you're an early stage company or a small team. It can be really effective. And I think you'll see the value in it very quickly if you start doing that.
Yeah, we'll link to there's a chat on the right hand side, and there is a link to your worksheet and to the app itself too, in case somebody wants to check out the doc.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the theory. Now there is like a dozen of questions that about the implementation that are buzzing in my head now, and let's see if anybody else wants to pile their questions up in the questions tab. So one question is, who should be doing this? And there is customer success, customer support, who is interacting with the customer, and product team, who's implementing. Do you need to get together once per week for 2 hours and just unwrap old insights? What's the procedure?
Yeah, who should be doing this? I guess in an ideal world, I'd say everyone. Every team should be involved in one way, but I also know from my own experience that that's not super realistic. That's not always going to be the case. I think at the end of the day, it boils down to who benefits from understanding this. And I think the goal is that different departments come together, because I think the biggest problem right now is silos. Everyone's talking to the customer, and that information just kind of sits in each department. I think that's currently the biggest shortcoming. That's the biggest limitation, is that people are just kind of split off from one another and not sharing that information. So creating a session once a week, once a month, even once a quarter, where you bring everything together. When I was working at Recruity, we would sit and go through all the customer support tickets once in a while, just through all of them. And that is a frustrating, tedious task, but you just get so much insight into doing that. And it often will validate or invalidate ideas you have. It'll spark new ideas. So who should be doing this? If you have researchers, they should be doing it. If you have UXers, they should definitely be doing it. One of the reasons we started Reveall is because that's a really difficult question to answer, who should be doing it. That's why we created a tool to do it for you. And then everyone kind of has to pitch in and benefit from it. Even if you have a lean process, everyone just needs to get involved. Everyone needs to share information, and just create a process that works for you. There's no one tool or process that works for every company. Every company has different people, different personalities, different tools at their disposal. So I think, just like I say, agreeing to do it is half the battle. Once everyone agrees to do it, you'll find a way to do it effectively.
From your experience, what's best, to continually do that, or like planned sessions, like you mentioned. I'm just making notes of, like reviewing support tickets together or something like that. It's really an interesting
Um,
practice.
I think it should be both. I think planning sessions together can be a continuous thing. So I would just kind of do both. I think continuously pushing the information. Yeah, so we try to do that in our product through automations. So in that way, you don't have to ask customer support every day about sending that information in, because you can set up a Zapier integration or something and it'll push that in. It's something we're planning to release. But other than that, it's very difficult to get people to do something like that super continuously, especially because from a customer support perspective, there is an indirect interest in sharing that information with product, because ultimately improving the product and the experience will reduce the load on customer support. So there's a vested interest, but it's not a direct tangible interest. Their main challenge right now is solving this customer complaint or putting out this fire. So in that sense, having people do this continuously is very difficult to sustain, especially as the company grows. In that case, we generally propose that create a continuous check-in. Just do it once a month, once a quarter, once a week. It depends on how much information, how valuable you see it, how much time people want to commit to it. In our company, customer support sits in the product team. Like that's how it's by design. We keep those things close.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of ways to solve this, but I would definitely check in regularly to go over this feedback.
How do you solve the problem of extracting and condensing insights from, let's say, an interview that took place or a sales demo or something like that?
Yeah, so that's really hard generally because you have all of these scattered sources. So that's something that we actually do in our platform, where you bring all the information into one place. So we parse it as plain text, and then you can just highlight the bits of plain text and turn that into data points with sentiment analysis. So you
Mm-hmm.
just essentially you can upload a video and then it'll just transcribe it. You can upload a survey, it'll just parse it as plain text. So that's literally a problem we try to solve, because otherwise it's just a lot of manual work. That's the reality.
But
Um,
it still includes like going through the transcript and highlighting something by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if we automate that away, we're all out of a job anyways, and then we have other problems to worry about. Is the truth? There's always going to be a manual factor, a manual or personal, a human interpretation factor. I think maybe one day we'll have sophisticated machine learning algorithms that can bear the big brunt. But right now, generally, when we talk to UX people or product people, the problem isn't going through a transcript. The problem is that whole thing of, here's the recording, and now we have to get the transcript, and then we have to save it somewhere, and then we have to go over it, and then we have to copy paste the text somewhere else. It's all of this nitty gritty stuff before you even go through the transcript that we can eliminate through technology. But the process of going through a
Mm-hmm.
transcript, you're always going to have to do. If you're finding that tedious as a team, what I would suggest is to make it kind of like a focus group session. You just bring 4 or 5 people from different departments together. Everyone synthesizes the information themselves and presents it, and then you try to create a report out of it together. And that's something you can do once a quarter. But we honestly, like our core belief, the reasoning behind our company is that you should be doing this on a continuous basis, and the only way to do that is through technology. But of course, I'm also biased; otherwise, um, I wouldn't be honest. So we built a solution for this because there is no great solution for this right now.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, in your software or elsewhere where we decide to store those insights, what's that unit that you store? Is it the source information? So are you storing like interview this, interview that, or are you storing and classifying the insights themselves? I might actually answer this question by looking at your spreadsheet and now realize, but
Yeah, so I think we like to start with the voice of the customer. We think that's always an easy and relatable starting point, and then you complement that with other data. What we suggest is to
mm-hmm.
work on a project basis. So this is where you can take a continuous approach, or you can also take a project-driven approach. So generally, you're trying to find something out, right? You're trying to learn something, you're trying to do something. So you can take a customer segment or a persona research, or there's all kinds of different themes you can build around a project, and then you gather the information on the basis of that theme, you map it out, and then you take decisions on it. So I think creating themes or setting goals behind research helps a lot, because if you're just continuously doing this without a clear line, a clear direction, it'll get tedious and tiring very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So let's say you're doing this right. You're extracting insights from customer sentiments, and you're storing them. And how do you? Well, part of your plan is to act on them, but ultimately, it ends up the way that there is like a 5-year-old company, and they're sitting on a gigantic database. Yeah, sure, some of these have been acted on, but it's still a wealth of knowledge. How do you propagate it to people who care?
Yeah. Yeah, so we have a really concrete solution in mind. I guess the bad news is we're still building it. But I think fundamentally it's using ways to visualize data to understand it. So I think you need to tie it to something. So tie it to personas, tie it to customer journeys, tie it to user flows,
Mm-hmm.
tie it to brainstorms and cart sorts. I think there's a lot of tools, UX like tools. I mean, as in like theoretical tools that you can use to interpret this information and gain the most out of it. And then you need to decide, I think the themes and the goals, they help you do that better. So if you're dealing, you can also do this reactively, right? If you're building a new feature or product, um, or you're changing an experience, you can map back to the original information. You can kind of try and find the data afterwards to validate the ideas you have, or to invalidate the
Mm-hmm.
ideas you have, or to guide and mold the ideas you have. That is something that you can definitely do. So starting with a solution and trying to validate it with data is always easier, of course. If you're starting with the data and then trying to gain ideas out of it, customer journey mapping can be a great tool for that.
What's your just overall recommendations for a SaaS company that has a growing team to just manage knowledge across product knowledge and customer knowledge across people?
Yeah, I think the first step is really agreeing that it's important, and worth investing time and effort into. I think that's the first. The second is put someone in charge of coordinating that process.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a particular person. Ideally, it should be a person who works the most with customer data, because they're gonna be more intrinsically motivated to run this process. So have someone who owns customer development within your business. Those are probably the two main steps you can take. And then building a process and choosing the right tools, that's then secondary. But agree that it's important, make it core part of your strategy, core part of your culture and identity, and then rally the people around it. Pick a person to own this process and drive it.
Mm-hmm. Um, what are your favorite resources when it comes to actual research? And as you've been talking about, asking biased questions, of course, the Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick comes to mind. For me, it's
Mm,
been one of the most eye-opening books on the subject. Are there
yeah.
any other that you could recommend?
Resources particularly related to this. Yeah, there's some good stuff about it. There's a so part of the Lean series, you have Lean customer development. It's part of the Lean startup, Lean UX. Lean UX also has some good stuff in there, but Lean customer development, or the customer development playbook, those are really good ones. And then a resource for just general customer centricity is a book called Customer Centricity by Peter Fader, from the Wharton Business School. It's a really short book, and you can read it in an hour or an hour and a half. But he really changes the perspective of what customer centric means. So customer centric doesn't mean serving all your customers; it means serving your best customers and using
Oh,
that information to take action. And I think that's
mhm.
really important, because when you're dealing with all this data, you need to prioritize who you're looking into and who you're trying to help. And he gives this analogy of, he talks about the company Nordstrom, and how somebody randomly took their tires to Nordstrom and said, "Hey, I'd like these exchanged," and they exchanged them, even though it's not part of their core business, and he wasn't a customer. And that in the past was used as an example of great customer service. But really good customer service is understanding who are the customers who really get you, who really love what you do. How do you understand them better to build a product that serves them better? And he gives a really good and controversial example of, he says that Apple is not a customer centric company, but Tesco's is. Tesco, the
Why?
supermarket chain
Why
in
is
the
that?
UK.
Tell us more. Why is that?
Well, because Apple builds whatever they want to build and expect us all to follow, which they do very successfully, by the way. And I'm sure they take into account a lot of usability tests and a lot of UX. Before anyone here who's working for Apple tells me, or says that I said they don't, I'm sure they take a lot of that into account. But Apple builds and people follow. That's kind of the core way that the company operates. I don't think any user I don't think anybody wants the charger of this to be underneath so you can't use it at the same time. I don't think anybody wants to have 50 dongles attached there. There's no user research or feedback that says, hey, I'd love to have 50 dongles attached to my my Mac. They build stuff, and then they build a strong brand of communication around it, and then people do follow. Whereas Tesco's gathers every single piece of information when you're purchasing, and uses that information to understand who are the main people, who's the person who's usually at Waitrose or Sainsbury's. This is a very UK-centric example, unfortunately, but who's usually at Whole Foods or whatever, and just popping into Tesco's because they need to, and who's the person who's coming into Tesco's every single day and buying. And they actually choose the layout of the food and the groceries, and everything in the shop is based on customer data. It's all based on how people are purchasing, and the people who come to Tesco's tend to buy certain things more, so those are more laid out in a certain way, and they really build the entire experience to serve the best customers. That doesn't mean you say to all the other customers, go away, we don't care. You serve all the customers. Having good customer service is a great principle to have. Serving all customers well is a great principle to have. But what I give as a really concrete example, there's a lot of companies that pride themselves in customer support, and at some point they grow, their customer base grows, and their support team can't keep up, and then the support starts to suffer. Whereas what a really customer-centric company, by Peter Fader's definition, would do is to create different layers of customer support, which are then in line with the kind of customer segments that you're addressing. So the best target customers will have will probably pay a higher package, have a higher plan, and have priority customer support. Whereas freemium customers who might be super inactive will have a ticketing system, an automated ticketing system. There's lots of ways to implement this in practice. Basically,
love you talking about that. You mentioned Henry Ford and his quote about fast horses, and he has another quote that's my favorite, and that is, "You can have a car of any color as soon as that color is black." And that sounds like Steve Jobs to me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure. I wouldn't focus too much on the people here necessarily. I just pull out the quote that fits what I'm trying to say. So I guess that's what we all do. But yeah, I think, but there is a point to that. If you know, for example, if your best customers all don't care about the color so much and care more about other performance factors, then probably you shouldn't spend too much time investing in colors. So I think that's one of those things where customer service and customer centricity are both important, but they're not the same thing. And that's the same with this customer voice, the customer data. It's not just what they're saying, it's who is saying what really matters.
So do you suggest there should be like a actual like numbers or rating system as per who is the source of the insight?
I think there should be customer segmentation. I think it's just really important to know your personas, do a persona research, know which segments are the most active. And when I say best customers, it doesn't mean necessarily they spend the most money, by the way. You might be an SMB, you might be a SaaS company focused on SMBs, and then you have a corporate bank that's spending 10 times more than everyone else, but they're constantly lacking features. There's things that they can't manage. So defining the best customer doesn't necessarily mean the customer that pays the most. It's a combination of things. It's a customer that pays, that is easy to convert. It's a customer that gets your product, that has a great experience, that leaves great NPS scores, that has a healthy relationship with customer success and support. So not asking too many questions, but asking enough to show that they're engaged in trying the features. So the key is to create these customer segments and understand which segments are financially beneficial, which segments are really easy on customer support. My experience has often been that the customers that pay the least tend to have the most customer support requests. I'm sure other people in SaaS have experienced that before as well. So it's important to understand these dynamics. Who's most active? Which customer segment is referring the most other customers? And if you then have one customer segment that stands out on a number of these factors, they're probably the voices I would listen to the first and the most.
There's also another type of segmentation that's really overlooked, and that we Userless provides lifecycle messages. So we always encourage people to also segment their user base by lifecycle stage, and that's also important. Like at what stage of their journey, being onboarded or being into the app for 2 years, like that's different. That's a different kind of person, right? And they also
Absolutely.
can have different insights.
Absolutely.
If our listeners could just go and do one thing after today's call that does not require specific software or buy-in from the entire team, but relates to voice of customer, what could that be?
Uh, Send a survey to everyone in the company and ask them how many times per month they've spoken to a customer in the last 3 months
A survey to the company, to the team.
within your team.
Okay. And what do
If
the
you face the
results?
reality, huh? The results will have their own impact. I think everyone thinks they talk to the customer more than they do. We did this once at one of my previous companies. We asked everyone how often do you talk to the customer? And of course, salespeople talk every day, but you'll find some people who will jump on the customer centricity train very quickly. But if you ask them when did you last speak to a customer, they say, well, I kind of spoke to a customer 4 weeks ago, and then 8 months ago, or whatever. I think that's the most important. If people aren't talking to the customer every day, then that's the first thing, or every week or whatever. That's the first thing to fix. After that, you can start worrying about what are we going to do with this information? How are we going to collect it? How are we going to organize it? How are we going to segment? But
I
there's a
like it
big
how you
difference.
use I like it how you use the phrasing. That's the proper customer research phrasing, not like how often do you talk to customers, but when was the last time, which brings like takes the bias out of people who think about themselves
Yeah,
and
there you go.
just
I've
pulls out
built
the
it into
facts,
my
right?
system. If you say how often, everyone says one or two. I've done the survey. I've learned that the hard way. You say how often do you talk to customers? Everyone says, oh, once a month. But if you say, hey, when was the last time, or what was the conversation? And then you say, what about the time before that? Um, or who were the last 3 customers you spoke to, and when? That's a very concrete question. And you just say, everyone should be honest, and there's no punishment for it. There's not judgment. It's just that people need to face and if people are talking a lot to the customer, then you don't have a problem in that sense. Then focus on getting that information segmented and organized. But I think that's probably the most effective thing I've done in a company is usually these really simple little things that don't seem that important.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom today. Where can people, yeah, we kind of talked about this, but where can people read more, find more about yourself and your tool?
Yeah, well, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. I don't have any other social media, so it's the only place to reach me. And yeah, connect, follow, and otherwise reveal.co, reveal with 2 L's. .co. There we share all of our new guides, all of our new blog. We're launching a newsletter soon. And yeah, if people want to check out the product, they should give it a spin. We're releasing a bunch of new features in a couple of weeks, so that's going to be exciting. And
Yep.
yeah,
Congrats on the launch, by the way, this summer.
thank you.
And good luck on
Thanks.
the journey. Thanks so much for joining us today. Everyone, we will do our best to publish this soon on Vimeo and YouTube, and we'll probably also write a recap post. So stay tuned for the learnings. Thanks so much, Ferdinand, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.